dang complicated, you know, man. It's like a dang old Rubik's Cube, man. You like talking about blue, red, man, then you get to one side and like messed up.
All right, Luddic Bath, welcome back to the Jay Burden Show. How are you doing?
Yeah, thanks for having me back. It's always a pleasure to be on. So I'm doing good. I've been able to relax a little bit in the last days of 2022. And how have you been? Have you been able to chill out a little bit?
Yeah, I have. I've been doing well. I've been able to take a few days off work for the longest. It's been a really long time since that, which has been good for me, good to catch up. Although it seems like everyone in the world has gotten sick. I think that we're finally getting paid back for all of the sickness everyone avoided over COVID. We're kind of returning to the mean, I guess, and so everyone seems to have something.
Yeah, I've noticed the same things. I've had so many cancellations in my own life because of that. So, but it seems to be a pattern of 2022. People's been sheltered in lockdown. They just keep getting sick over and over again. And yeah, it's
Right.
going to take a while until we reach some equilibrium.
No, I completely agree. So we were originally planning on talking, a week or so ago, but obviously, things came up IRL. And so you specifically wanted to come on to talk about, several things. So one, an interaction that you had and kind of a semi-viral response. Then, of kind of a, shall we say, a subversive conservative type, basically, making the based right-wing take for porn. And then kind of how that relates to hyperreality, which I think is a concept we'll, explore at more length. So if it's okay with you, I think I'll probably just read that tweet out and we can, kind of go from there. Does that sound good?
Yeah, do it.
All right. So this guy, if I'm not mistaken, he ended up deleting his account, didn't he?
Yeah, I mean, at first he blocked me, and then he deleted his account, and then his account is back online now. So I wasn't sure. I mean, I think I've not been on Twitter that long, but aside from the dunking, I think Twitter is a sort of good place to just take these kind of half-formed brain farts and just throw them out there and see how people react to it. And I mean, you might get a lot of hate, but hate is attention as well, right? So if you just want to grow a following and use it to build clout for yourself, you can just come with this kind of half-ass takes and throw them out there. And I sort of assumed that that's what he was trying to do, but based on the fact that he blocked so many people and that he deleted his account later, I actually suspect he might actually have been serious. It's very easy to, if you read the tweet out, to think that this is just a joke, but I mean, it might actually be serious. And I think that's, if there's any advantage to Twitter, you can sort of take some ridiculous idea and we can just bring that up and discuss it and see, what's our response to this, and then we'll just move on. So maybe you want to read it out.
I will also say this guy fails the early life check, and that's the only thing I'm going to say on that part. For right-wingers who want to ban porn, I think it's worth pointing out that porn is pretty much the only form of visual media that has dodged political correctness / wokeness. It is sexist, racist, and for the most part, more heteronormative than almost all TV / movies today. Timmy goes to university where he learns that there are 72 genders and that racism is the greatest sin. He even believes these things. Then he goes home, opens up an incognito tab, and watches a video of a buff guy dominating an attractive woman, and their race is in the title. Why? Because porn shows that there is underneath all the bullshit and propaganda sexual feelings and desires that exist independently of, quote, societal expectations or, quote, how we'd like things to be, end quote, and instead reflect the ugly and awesome reality of a relatively fixed human nature. The reasons given for banning porn are pretty weak empirically, i.e. association with ED, lower sexual interest, etc. If the problems men are facing in society have much more to do with women becoming more economically independent and the rise of social media, not porn. Anyway, people on the right who want to ban porn might want to think about the consequences of banning the one widespread, un-PC / anti-woke popular expression of human sexuality in a media landscape that is already saturated with leftist propaganda. Just a thought. So yeah, there's to use a lefty phrase, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yes, and there's so many angles that you can use to attack this on. So I mean, the tweet that I got had a lot of upvotes, which is basically the standard sort of Groyper response, like how does anal sex benefit the movement and so on, and that's what got a lot of upvotes. But there is a more kind of high IQ conversation to be had around this, assuming that this guy was serious, right? I mean, for context, this guy Jonah Davis he works as a political consultant, right? So this guy is producing stuff for think tanks. I mean, makes you understand why we're ending up where we are. But I mean, what came to my mind was really the concept of hyper reality here, because he puts out a sort of dichotomy that you have the kind of fake, woke universe, in a sense that you go to the university and you watch, sanitized media, quote unquote, and that's the, the 22 genders and all of this sensitivity training and like the black lesbians that are everywhere and so on, and everybody has to be sensitive and talk about their feelings and their pronouns, and that's fake. But the real world, you see, that's porn, in a sense. But like this is where I feel like the concept from the philosopher Jean Baudrillard, sort of French postmodernist who wrote the book Simulation and Simulacrum, it's the concept of hyperreality. And I assume like a lot of your audience is familiar with this already, but it's really the idea that you are in a sort of condition where reality and fiction just blend seamlessly together. And I think the best indicator of if you're in hyper reality is that if you place a certain dichotomy between reality and fiction, and both of your examples are fiction, like this guy. I mean, I had a colleague, I don't want to dox anyone, but my colleague was talking to me about, entertainment for his children, right? And his son wanted to watch the show that's called the Squid Game or something. That's this Korean show it's a bit of a similar show to the Japanese Battle Royale that came out in the early aughts, if I'm not wrong. But it's like this sort of grotesque game show where people get killed and so on. And I was talking about how like that could be, potentially damaging to his son, and he's not going to understand the difference between reality and fiction and so on. But then he interrupted me and said that well, it's not hard to understand the difference between reality and fiction. Like I understand that there's that the Squid Game and Schindler's List are not the same thing. Like one's fake and the other ones are real. And
the famous documentary Schindler's List, yes,
this documentary, which it's really just it's a book from an Australian author that's been made into a film by Steven Spielberg. And I mean, it is fictional, even though it has some basis in things that happen in reality. It's also a completely sort of hyper real product. So I feel like that's where a lot of people are in their lives, especially if you live in like a developed nation, that you have two alternatives to like, this is fake and this is real, but the real one is also fake.
Well, I think that you see this very cleanly in kind of the way that people almost slot their experiences into real life into kind of narrative frameworks, right? So people conceptualize themselves narratively. And the control of like the narrative apparatus of media and culture has basically poisoned, or has kind of like snuck in these poison pills into people's mind. So I've said a couple times that I've spent some time with my more progressive family members recently, and there are a couple of these that are kind of cultural tropes that are not necessarily reflections of reality, but they are kind of popular movie or popular, television storylines. So for instance, when the classic line of like, oh, conservative Republican congressman caught, having an affair. And that happens all the time. And it's one of those things where like, well, does it? And I'm not a fan of, conservative Republican congressmen, so to speak, but what people are reacting to that is one or two news stories and then dozens of jokes or kind of like cultural items. It's a common, line in movies. It's a common, just kind of cultural meme, so to speak. And there's almost this blurring where, the kind of like meme space becomes real because it is repeated so many times. Like it's incredibly postmodern, but it is essentially just like by being widely believed, it becomes almost a fact of reality, regardless of any like empirical basis.
Yes, I mean, you have the concept of sort of intersubjectivity, right, where something just becomes real because everybody believes it. I mean, the people will use examples like currency and so on, but I mean, following a bit on the hyperrealism concept, the Matrix movies were sort of made as they were having taken inspiration from the concepts of Jean Baudrillard, but like in the Matrix, there's actually a pretty clear delineation between the real and the fake, in a sense that, and this kind of misses the point of hyperrealism, to where you're not supposed to actually know the difference. And I think like the filmmaker David Cronenberg, who has a couple of movies like Videodrome and Existence, it's a lot closer to explaining how this works, where you're in simulations within simulations, and you don't actually understand the difference between television and reality and so on. But like the example you came with the like gay Republican congressman, this is something that you could have entirely memed into existence. I don't think you even need to have a single real empirical case of this happening at all. You can just create a bunch of Hollywood movies where this happens, and eventually people are just going to internalize it as like this is that's just how it is, right?
Well, no, definitely. And to me, this is something I bring up often, but in C.S. Lewis's book, The Pilgrim's Regress, he has this moment, and this kind of like, and look, like anything in kind of like the tradition of Pilgrim's Progress, which is the book that he's kind of responding to. It is very early analogy as far as fiction goes. It's extremely unsubtle, right? But it was kind of it was a new literary device at the time. And so when he retells it, he has this, the giant, who locks our main character up in his dungeon. In the original, I can't remember his name, and I don't really remember what he represents. But in Lewis's retelling, this giant, this Cyclops is Freud. And what he does is whenever he looks at you, your skin goes translucent. So you can kind of see beneath the surface. And what it does to all of the people there is they essentially can't look at each other. They're just disgusted by the other prisoners there, because instead of seeing them for kind of people, they just see that this part of reality, which to a certain degree is true. There is kind of this like liminal, there is this kind of like meat reality, that is a part of us, but it's not all of us. It's not what makes us as people. And to me, reading this tweet, the thing that stuck out to me the most is his, I guess, equivocation of that kind of like base animal human nature with the belief that humans are not a tabula rasa. And there's some overlap there, but there's kind of an equivocation, or there's like a 3-step process of, one, porn shows us about deep reality, which is kind of like the hyper reality part of it, which is its own premise that we can attack. 2, the rest of society, shows us, it tells us that there is no human nature, shows us a distorted version of human nature. And therefore, as conservatives, as right wingers who believe in kind of constrained human nature, porn is on our side, right? Like that's the syllogism. And every one of those I find completely and totally wrong, because the fact is, right, that like much like the dozens of crime shows where where a bunch of white gangsters go into an upper middle class neighborhood to steal lunch money for crack from aspiring black teenagers. Like that's not what really happens. It's not showing you something real. It's showing you a narrative someone's trying to sell you, so to speak.
Yeah, those are all really good points. And I think, I wanted, to address point number 1 first. It's really the idea that, I mean, I think you are correct in that there is, this lower, more base part of human nature that is quite ugly. But the idea that like porn is like a genuine expression of that nature is, I mean, it's highly questionable if you look at sort of the history of the development of pornography and what pornography was 40 years ago, 30 years ago, and so on. Like it's always remained constant, which it hasn't. It's also one of the things that have gotten more and more hyper real. If you try to watch some pornography, maybe from like the 1970s, it looks more like art films today, with the level of nudity that's become normal and so on. But I mean, porn, the state of it, the way that it is today, it's something that is extremely performative. It's very extreme, and it's very much conditioned by a certain, let's just say, chemistry. I mean, I don't know if you knew this, but the Czech Republic is considered like the porn capital of the world, and it's also the capital of something else, which is methamphetamine, right? I mean, for those of you who watched Breaking Bad, this is, I think, it's part of the plot in season 5 where Walter White tries to sort of expand his meth empire, and they're trying to go into the Czech Republic because they say that like 5% of the people who live there are meth heads, and it's actually not that far from the truth. And like that's the reason why so much of porn production is happening there, because like methamphetamine has this type of aphrodisiac effect on women, including as being a sort of painkiller thing, and it's like this sort of extreme rush type of a drug. And what is porn right now is basically what I consider like meth sex, in a sense. Like you have people that are extremely sort of high on meth. You will have the male usually be on certain hormones that they will inject themselves, like with Viagra, straightly into the penis, and stuff like this. It's like this sort of totally insane practices that no normal human being would ever engage in. But that's sort of what you're seeing actually on the screen. That's what's behind it, in a sense. But it's being sold by this Jonah Davis character as like this is heteronormative, in a sense. Like when you have this like sort of French African bodybuilder character who is dominating some Eastern European woman and doing these sort of extreme acts, like this is this is heteronormative. And I think if it is, then maybe we should try to support the wokies in getting rid of it. But it makes me question whether he actually has like a girlfriend in real life, or he has like some real sex life, or if it's just like it's all computers and stuff for him.
Well, to me, and I think that sex and violence are kind of linked. And you see this and saw this very cleanly with what happened in the US over kind of the summer of love, where these like scrawny, Antifa types who had been raised on, again, hyper real violence, right? So ultra stylized, Marvel movies and, things like that. We're speaking about violence and had a casual attitude towards violence that would just be unsustainable if this person had any kind of like real contact with, what they were talking about, right? Like, okay, being in a fist fight is nowhere near as either as much fun or as easy to recover from as, like American daytime TV will tell you. It's not like, oh, you just get a little cut on the corner of your mouth and you're ready to go again, right? Like violence is serious. But in each case, right, the perception is so warped by these kind of like ultra produced and ultra, I guess, polished kind of like simulations of the real thing, that it's almost like you're not capable, with not, okay, I don't want to put it that far. It can become a substitute, in much the same way that, right, like that a xenoestrogen can, take a receptor that your body naturally has for a hormone and replace it with some other molecule. It's kind of the same thing where the part of your brain that is designed to react to sex and violence has been kind of tricked into a much more extreme substitute almost, and it completely destroys your frame of reference. So I think you're completely right.
Yes, I mean it's a perfect example there with these riots. Like when you're watching these people stand out there and fight, and some of them they're wearing the black masks. So you have like the anti-protesters with the like the garbage pail shield and the Captain America hat and so on. It's just so extremely hyper real. I mean, it's not cool in the same way that the Marvel movies are cool, but you can see that there's no way these people would be acting like this if they hadn't seen it, right? So these things have real consequences, like that you can see and observe all around you, and that's been like one of these other things that I picked up. This influencer that's become super popular in 2022, this, called the Liver King. This is another example of this extreme hyper reality thing. I think like this is probably one of the most hyper real things I've seen probably all year. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
So yeah, I saw him kind of, and this is a little bit embarrassing, but one of the few like normie social medias that I'm still on is I'm still on Snapchat, effectively because I only use it to talk to 2 or 3 people, because it's kind of the social media that allows me to like take a picture of my friend sleeping at a party, and then like crudely edit it so it looks like he's kissing Michelle Obama. Like it's not highbrow stuff, but packaged into that, like if you swipe one tab over, kind of like the equivalent of the trending tab on, Twitter, is Snapchat news, which is the absolute dregs. Like it is the worst of the worst, tabloid news. But, just kind of like once or twice seeing what was there, this guy, the Liver King, was extremely popular. And I'm not the most familiar with his work, but essentially his contention was you need to be eating essentially raw organ meat, and that will allow you to have the physique of the Liver King, which you guys should look up. And he is freakishly muscular. And to anyone who's ever been in a gym before, it is very obvious he is on steroids, like incredibly obvious. And there was recently kind of like a micro scandal, which is incredibly stupid because I'm not sure who he was fooling, where it was revealed that he wasn't really natty. You know, he wasn't just getting that jacked off of eating like beef liver. He was in fact injecting like over $10,000 worth of steroids every month, which is on one hand a scandal because he was lying, but on the other hand, it's kind of like you look at the guy and he looks like a Street Fighter character, you know, with like huge vascular shoulders. He's like incredibly red, and it's not the biggest surprise. But is that a pretty good summation of who he is, Luddic?
Yes, I mean, you know, he has like the giant beard and the long hair, and like his physique looks like he could just show up at a regional bodybuilding show at like a high level and just win like on the day. Really, he doesn't really need that much prep, and he's you know, in spite of the long beard, he's like shaved all over the body, so you can see all the veins, you can see the abs and so on. And like his gimmick is that he runs around in you know, he's always shirtless. Right, he comes on interview shirtless. You know, he eats these sort of liver, raw animal, this kind of like nose to tail products, and he like he's trying to promote this sort of concept that he calls the 9 ancestral tenets, right? And this is sort of thing where I feel like I need to be a little bit careful because there's certain, you know, overlap with this character. Like he managed to package and sell himself in a way that like he was included, you know, as an interviewee on what's his name? He Productions, Ethan Klein, right? Ethan Klein wanted to have this guy, which is weird because you'd think that, okay, if you have someone who's promoting, you know, a healthy, primal lifestyle or something like that, that's somebody like Raw Egg Nationalist or the people on the Tucker Carlson show who are advocating.
Right, it's only a few steps away.
Tanning your balls and such, but he's able to sort of navigate himself in a way that he's been able to show up on these kind of like lefty shows to market his lifestyle and so on. And I mean, of course, the after the scandal, I've seen so many of these analysis videos in terms of like, oh well, you know, he started out, but he had a vision and he wanted to, he really wanted to, you know, do something for the world, but he got carried away, and which I feel like it's completely missing the point of how cynical this operation is, right? I mean, the name of the Liver King, like his private citizen name, is Brian Johnson, and he made most of his money, like he was rich basically before he became the Liver King. And he became rich first as a pharmaceutical representative, like basically sort of a drug salesman, and then as a business owner, owning different like dental clinics and drug clinics and so on. And I mean, it is something I've talked about on one of the Longhouse streams. Like, what exactly is like the fitness grift? How does it work? It works in the way that you create some supplement, which is typically like you take something that's either completely ordinary, completely useless. Like I'll just buy some pill capsules and I put in some caffeine, I put in some sugar, and I say that this is like super sugar or super caffeine or something. And you put some guy on the poster for this who's been training for 20 years and taking heavy duty steroids. And I mean, it never seems to fail. Like, so you can mark this pill up like 10, 15, 20 times the price that you bought it in for, which is sort of unheard of in a lot of other industries. And if you look at the business model of the Liver King and these ancestral tenets, it's really about selling the cheapest parts of the animal. I mean, if you go to like these butcher shops and you know, these kind of meat packing plants and the places where you can buy, you know, what is the cheapest things to buy, you know, per pound? It is liver, you know, bone marrow, testicles, head, all of the things that he is buying, and not just saying that this is like something you should eat. He's saying like the reason you're not as big as he is, and the reason you're unhealthy and unhappy and so on and so forth, is the fact that you're not eating like the cheapest parts of the animal that nobody else wants. So it's a extremely sort of by the book standard bodybuilding grift by a person who has been a professional salesman most of his life. And I think that people are sort of missing, you know, completely missing that point. And like just looking at how good this guy is to just use every opportunity to keep spinning into this kind of hyper real version of himself in just every opportunity. I mean, it's really fascinating, and seeing how defenseless people are to this stuff, really.
Well, and it's especially odd because this guy really is a character. Like, I actually don't know his real name. I only know him as the Liver King, you know, which is practically like you can imagine it being the name of like a professional wrestler, you know, or like a Saturday morning cartoon character. You know, it's not like this guy's name is like John such and such. You know, and obviously, even when, you know, these kind of like fitness influencers, you know, who've been around forever, even when they, you know, were selling, they were kind of playing it up. But this is kind of almost so on the nose because he's not even playing a character with a name. You know, he's basically like adopting this like mantle as this kind of like, I don't know, this like kind of like bodybuilding superhero almost.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, you know, in real life, there's a lot of people, like even you and me can sit here and say that I don't understand how people were so surprised. But you could look at, for instance, his YouTube channel or Instagram, and if you have the extension that allows you to see dislikes, you can see the dislikes on the ratio on the video before and after the revelation of the steroid story, which is huge. Like now it seems like the majority of the views are dislikes now, and people are really angry and they feel really betrayed. And to be honest, like if I ended up taking this guy's advice, right? If I believed that he was completely natural and completely sincere, and I got wrapped up in this hyper real thing, and I started to buying large batches of horse testicles and liver and that kind of stuff, and I stopped showering and stopped brushing my teeth just to eat this stuff, expecting that I would look like that, I would feel betrayed. You know, there's this. I mean, with like snake oil and this other stuff, like this kind of sugar paste, at least it would have just been like a dental appointment or something. But I think a lot of people, you know, it's embarrassing for the fact that, you know, you're eating like these kind of like low cuts of meat and doing a lot of stuff that seems completely out of the ordinary. That, I mean, in the best case, it does nothing for you. In the worst case, you might actually end up harming yourself. Let's say like you have, you know, iron poisoning. I know it's a pretty big problem. If you eat like way too much liver, you might get too much iron, which is a problem for men, and so on.
Right. Yeah. And it is, I understand that, you know, probably all of us have been fooled at least once, you know, in some way. And I guess that one of the kind of like unintended consequences of the internet is it really has increased the reach of these kind of like, you know, like shysters and, you know, kind of like snake oil salesmen, right? Like the word you used. I guess it's just, it kind of it makes it clear that the lie that the internet would, you know, educate us all, you know, make us smarter, more intelligent human beings. And really all it's done is offered kind of like a grander scale for human nature to play out. You know, you'd think like, oh, this is the perfect, like YouTube, that's the best way to debunk someone. You know, like anyone can react to it. And you see like, no, not at all. All it does is, you know, allow these people to reach, you know, a wider audience.
Yeah, it's exactly the point. But you also see like the cycle of unraveling is happening a lot quicker. You know, with these shysters that they come up really quickly, and there's some information that comes out, and they will unravel. But if they're sophisticated, they could, you know, pull themselves back up again. And that's what I noticed with a lot of these people is that they're they're extremely sophisticated in a sense that you can Google search their name and you don't find anything about who they really are. You know, it's just all just like page after 1, 2, 3. It's just all marketing, right? So they've hired, you know, expert marketers and people who understand search engine optimization and so on, to the point where like all of the negative stuff has just been scrubbed off the internet, and you can only find the surface level stuff. So I mean, the best thing we have is our skeptical instincts, right? It's that can sort of carry us, but for most of this sort of normie mass, that's not enough. Like they're just going to buy into this stuff over and over again.
No, that's definitely true. And it's interesting because there is this kind of like, and this is kind of going back to the original, you know, original tweet about porn, right? There's this kind of like idea that, you know, kind of media is, or media can be neutral in a way. You know, the idea that like, oh, it's not ideological, it's just showing reality. That, oh, you know, the guy on YouTube, he isn't trying to sell me anything. He's just, you know, spreading the good word of, you know, liver paste. And so it's one of those things where it's an idea that in many cases is not ever, you know, explicitly stated. You know, no one ever sits you down and is like, all right, like, you know, just if you can just trust people on the internet, you know, you can just, you know, these institutions are neutral. You know, these kind of like cultural production, it's neutral. You know, and there's almost like this, like these technologies have kind of like an inbuilt ideological slant just from how they're constructed in a weird way. You know, and kind of like the buried premise of that, you know, that tweet about porn is that like, oh, well, you know, porn is if anything, it's kind of like a neutral thing. like it's neutral to leaning our way. And to me, like that's kind of a fundamentally simplistic way of looking at technology, whether it be, pornography or, something like YouTube. Am I off base there?
No, I think you're correct, and I mean, from my perspective, I think one of the biggest problem is the fact that you get so much free stuff on the internet, and people are less and less interested in just making free stuff for idealistic reasons, because now, like the internet being as mainstream as it is, all of the companies are here now, right? And they want your attention. So, like, I think in the past it was a little bit easier to see a billboard and understand that was advertising, or to, you try to go and look at you get a free lunch, but they bring you into a timeshare meeting or something. It's much clearer to see the line between advertising and real life. But with the internet, where like you get free content, right? But the free content doesn't pay for itself, so they have to make money somehow, and because of that, they're using all of this quote unquote neutral space to inject messages, to inject marketing schemes, politics, and so on. And that's what makes it so insidious. I think most people are, not aware of that mechanic, and it's so easy to forget about it when you're just browsing and watching stuff. And there's so much, kind of subliminal stuff that you're not understanding. That I think if you're like a good, high trust person, I mean, you're essentially like a deer in the headlights. You get hit every time.
Well, and there's almost something that makes social media more difficult, because there is a mix between people, people producing it, kind of commodifying themselves, and then like brands. So the weird thing about, social media is everyone is kind of selling you something, but they're kind of selling you a piece of them. So in a weird way, and this is not necessarily how I view it, but you can kind of look at it from this lens. Like I am right now selling the audience on like a conversation I had, with an internet friend, right? That's one perspective to look at it. And that's me, but it's also not me, because this is an anonymous account, that I have a pseudonym for. But there are people who use their real names and are even more kind of like face forward than I am. It'll be like, and I'm sure you found these like tiny little YouTube channels, run by one guy who just has a very niche interest. And again, like that's maybe kind of an altered version of reality, but that distinction between, kind of like what we call face fags, the people with a pseudonym, and then, people who are essentially running a business operation under a name or under a pseudonym, that's kind of it's not really a neatly divided, spectrum, so to speak. And so in a previous era, when it was, oh, I am talking with someone versus I am in a business setting, it was kind of easier to distinguish one versus the other. But now it's always this kind of like odd, like in between space where you can never really tell how real anything is, just because of the kind of like the nature of the platform.
Yeah, no, it's I think that part is perfectly put. I mean, I'm almost glad that I'm not like an online personality with my face and real name on here, because like my life would just become entirely hyper real. I can create some distance between myself and the avatar, and even someone like the Liver King could essentially do that he has like a real personality, and as he puts on a show, even though for us it's not so easy to tell. But you have so many people who actually come on here with their real faces and names, and they have to, like, I mean, when do you get off work? It's like you're always you're always online, you're always at work, and you always have to sort of respond to demand and think in terms of these things. So I think it becomes, like you said, almost impossible to separate yourself from this kind of profile seeking, profile building character, and who you actually are. And I mean, you can sort of see why people are so unhappy.
Well, right. And I think that especially for us on the radical right, we need to kind of keep in mind, a point that the Distributus made that I think is completely correct. That essentially the mechanism of gathering clout, of building a large audience, increasing your reach, that is a viable strategy for our opponents. People like BreadTube, even the kind of like, based or not based, the kind of like enlightened, gigabrain centrists can kind of play that tactic. But the problem is the very nature of what we've been talking about, this kind of like deracinating and atomizing nature, kind of like consistently not being a real person, having to kind of like put on an act. That's entropic. That is antinomian. That is kind of not a left in an ideological sense, but a left in kind of a entropic sense. And so we are kind of forced by necessity to use these tools, right? Like this conversation, obviously, we live, 5,000 miles away, would never have happened without the internet. I probably never would have encountered many of, the ideas that I had without the internet. So it's a tool, but the idea that, gathering clout and becoming a personality, becoming, I'll be the Liver King, but I'll be based. It doesn't quite work that way. It's not an equivalent game. I guess that's kind of my thought on the issue.
Yeah, to be honest, I'm not even sure how like gathering the clout helps the bread tubers or the centrists, because I mean all you're doing is just kind of containing stuff, and I assume that if you're on the winning team or like if you're winning, it's better to just run the clock out, and that's what they're trying to do by just you just go online and dunk and you do debates and
when I mean
shit and so on.
They're winning, I mean not in the sense like a personal level, like it's probably not good for them, but I do mean in the sense that like they are allowed to like gather more like wealth and influence for themselves. They are rewarded by the regime for doing that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, in that sense, I can sort of see that. I mean, at least if you want to be like a full-time influencer and have like a good bank account or economic security, then you can't do that being a right-winger. I mean, we've just seen that over and over again. It's just it's not happening unless you. I mean, some people have been able to secure moderate funding, but it's not going to be like this kind of ContraPoints wash levels at really at any time. You're just going to get throttled at all opportunities. And I mean, like we talked about with the this kind of the quote unquote unenlightened masses of people who are always reached and always fooled by these scams. I feel like especially after the what happened in 2016, 2018, and so on, that audience is very much locked away from the people who are on the right, quote unquote. Like we can sort of reach other people who are very interested and who are willing to be in these debates, but we are in this space where we're almost forgetting about like this sort of mass of people, and we can't even interact with them in any logical way.
Right. I think you're correct on that. And the problem is there's kind of this schizophrenic nature to being online. The news cycle, so to speak, is so short, and it's hard to say because none of the people are really the same. Like there are obviously figures, but there's so much like changeover, like people miss things or people are out for a few weeks, that it's really unfair to say it like people don't understand it. But there is this kind of like, I guess like close-sightedness, where in one hand, out of one side of your mouth, you hear people say things like, oh, like we're a vanguard movement, we don't need, the masses. And then on the other, people are like, oh, I'm so mad because my Twitter account won't grow. And it's like, well, my brother in Christ, those are the same thing, And if you've accepted that premise that we don't need to be popular, then fair enough, right? Like I can accept that. Again, like you said, like if your plan to become a wildly popular, online political figure is to be, an autistic internet rightoid, well, you're in the wrong market, But nonetheless, I think that it is kind of the nature of like these platforms like YouTube and like Twitter especially, is they incentivize you to want to grow. They reward you with kind of like neuron activation, when you get a tweet that lands, when it grows, when it gets big. And so almost like there's this incentive buried into the system to kind of avoid unpopular things and avoid certain topics, and to lean into that kind of like hyper palatable like showmanship of making yourself a character, and doing all of these things that are very good for your metrics but are not necessarily good for you as a person.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right on that. I mean, on the first point with the normies, I also have noticed this schizophrenia where people on the right will first talk about how like dumb normies are, and then they will talk about like their mission is basically representing normies, like the reason that the current government is bad is because they're not taking care of, people in the, like in the American Midwest who are like the former working class, or they're not taking care of all these people on drugs, or. But I mean, that is sort of the masses in a sense that they say they're too good to even interact with. So it becomes like this constant back and forth between, we represent their interest and we're going to take care of them, and no, they're like too stupid to do anything. So who cares anyway, right? It's I don't think there's any good way to solve it.
Well, I think that these might be two slightly different issues, because I think that there's, on one hand, I don't think it's inconsistent to say, I don't think the vast majority of people should live political lives. Like, they should not be involved in decision making. And I want their lives to generally go well. Like, I don't think those are mutually exclusive. And maybe I was trying to make a more constrained point that, you can't both be proud of being a vanguard movement and then complain that you're not popular. I guess that was my more limited point.
Yeah, no, I see more what you mean now. And that is, I guess that is the most enlightened take, is that, you want them to do well, but they don't have to be, strictly involved in all of the things. But I guess on some level they will have to be involved, and it's not healthy to be, so isolated and so ghettoized by, this kind of like high IQ schizos that you kind of forget about the normal, 95 IQ person and what motivates them and so on. But as far as your other points, the incentivizing bad behavior, I think you're seeing that with everyone. I mean, I've even felt this stuff myself, like even with the like very limited audience and that I have, is that you do currently always get these nudges, right? You notice like these segments of audience that want certain things, and you just want to please, and you get the neuron activation when you get more updates. So you keep just trying to, okay, maybe I could compromise on this position, maybe I could like stay clear of this, and so on. It's a very tough balancing act.
Well, and the reason that I've been talking about it so much recently is because I kind of had this like crashing realization all at once. I did a stream with Prudentialist about, Rod Dreher, and I kind of had this like realization in the middle of the stream that I had kind of fallen prey to that. And it was one of those things where it's very easy to conceptually be like, oh yeah, I'll never be the guy who falls for it. Like, I'm smart enough to avoid this. And then you kind of have that realization all at once. You're like, wait a minute, I'm doing it right now. I'm playing into my enemy's playbook. I'm giving them, the clicks they want, like the stupid drama that they want. And on the smallest possible scale, right? Like it's a very like little thing, but it is kind of this realization that to a certain extent, like, and this is like the point made about the Matrix, right? That to a certain extent, the movie The Matrix is exactly what the Matrix would sell you to keep you in the box longer. This story about like you like fighting the righteous fight and doing all the right things, and look at all this positive affirmation you got. Neo, you're the hero, you did it. And when you kind of look up and you're like, wait a minute, the enemy's tools are providing me this positive reinforcement. And that doesn't mean on the other end, just post the most like disgusting, vile content that everyone hates. That's the most right-wing thing. But I do think it's good to have some like level of introspection, as kind of, we all are on one degree or another, to one degree or another posters. Like if you made it this far, you probably have an alt somewhere with, on Frog Twitter, or you're in Telegram somewhere. And I think it's good to have some level of, I guess, introspection, that to a certain extent, like the point of being on the internet is to affect the real world. It's not to lean further and further into, quote unquote, winning the battle on the, like this like kind of like hyper real plane, I guess.
Yeah, there's no winning that battle. I can relate to what you're saying, because I mean, myself, I'm probably more likely to click on your videos about this kind of like Rod Dreher drama and something like that. And I don't understand even what it is, if there's some primal part of the brain that just wants to bring attention to all of these like dramatic things in case of possible escalation or something. But I mean, there's not going to be any, escalation being on the internet anyway. So it is like you're saying. I mean, we're all going to fall victim to this. None of us are really that smart that we can just avoid all of these things. It's everybody's a human being with sort of, quite similar instincts. I mean, with the like you said, with the Rod Dreher thing, and it's I'm sorry, I dropped the point now, but like with the right in general, I think like you said, you don't want to play into the system, but you also don't want to go into this kind of light switch brain mode, which I see a lot of people on the right doing, where it's like, okay, the system that says this thing is good, and I'm just going to do the opposite thing. And of course, I'm seeing this more and more to the point where it's just like you can't have a movement that is just always kind of reacting to the system and okay, this is lame, and I'm like the Giga Chad who's doing the base thing that's like the opposite of what they're saying, no matter what it is. I mean, you just end up with so much retarded content. So I don't know how you feel, what you think about that.
No, definitely. And it's kind of a problem, I think, inherent to how we're set up, because we are, and I know people have, for some reason decided to spurg out about the phrase, dissident, right? But we are kind of political dissidents. Like, we dislike the system as it stands. And the hard truth in that is essentially that's kind of the only thing that unites this group of people, is we don't like current thing. And so to a certain degree, we are by definition reactionaries. We wish to, go back to a different way of organizing things. And while that's useful at a certain point, it's part of the reason that I don't talk about the left nearly as much as I talk about the right, or at least I try not to. And the reason I kind of go after, people who are nominally on our side more than just like the retarded shitlibs, it's because essentially, like, it is a trap, and it's fun and it's easy, and it's also something that is to a certain degree unifying. Like, lots of people can agree on that. The problem is it's only useful to a certain point. Once we have identified this doesn't work, going down, and this is like the James Lindsay tact of like endlessly going down, like it's cultural Marxism all the way down, finding another way in which system bad, system bad, system bad. But if you're not blazing new ground, you're just kind of rehashing something that, a lot of people have enjoyed. It is essentially just like in a weird way, it's a grift. It's essentially, I'm giving people what they want, kind of, and doing something that's not particularly difficult. Like, if you wanted to just rehash, SJW owned videos for the end of time, I'm sure that there's a YouTube niche for that. I'm sure that there's someone making lots of money doing that. But it's not, if you consider yourself someone who actually has, ideas that you believe in, if you want to actually like build something, it's kind of a cul-de-sac, so to speak.
Yes, and we talked about the critical drinker before I came on here, and I mean, he's not considered, to be like a hardcore right wing, but so much of what I think is the right wing right now, and people who self-identify like that, it's really just complaining, just complaining all the way down about whatever the left is doing, no matter what, and like nothing comes of this other than more complaining. That's why I actually kind of like the idea of like the sensible center. There's like many reasons to be for or against that, but really, like, thinking about just, no, I'm just like a pragmatic, quote unquote centrist person, because I'm not tied to this sort of right wing identity where my entire identity is based on just complaining about the current thing, like the like the critical drinker. As I mentioned, I saw his one of his newest videos that was about James Bond, and how like the next James Bond is going to be gay or LGBTQ or something, and this is horrible, and like what the people actually want is the masculine James Bond that we had in the past, and so on, and it's like this sort of combination of like very surface level understanding of the history of certain franchises with cultural criticisms that are also like, yeah, kind of, but it sort of lacks the depth, and it's on the one hand, you have these people who are creating the mass entertainment of just complaining about the left, but on the other hand, they're also creating entertainment for like the more high IQ leftists to come in and sort of pick this apart and see that, yeah, we told you, we have this kind of army of chuds out there who are just kind of reacting. And I mean, like you said in the beginning, there's a certain sport, I think, for progressives to just piss off conservatives. Like, I think they just enjoy pushing people's buttons and making them angry and having them make this content. So it's a very vicious cycle of this right and left stuff. And that's why I often just, try to just default to a kind of like centrist thing and being practical when you can, and maybe say like, yeah, I'm just a centrist, but I care about immigration, for example, or I care about certain economic policies. I don't have to be swept up in this thing where I have to defend every right-wing thing, like they say, no enemies to the right, but I also don't want to have to go out of my way to defend every retarded thing that's being produced in the right-wing community.
Well, it's hard because on one hand, you'll hear this from I've primarily heard this from like the like more jaded, Gen X individuals, people who've like fully dropped out of politics to a certain degree. Like my dad is kind of like this, and he views the culture war as a complete and total distraction. And the problem is that's not completely wrong. There is that kind of churn like you described where there's just an eternal like punching match of, well, you're a racist. Well, you're a homophobe. You're a kitty diddler, like all back and forth, just like eternal, I guess, just dialogue that never goes anywhere. But the problem is that can be true. And a lot of the like culture war content can be pointless. But the problem is that the falsity in that is, and then it doesn't matter, and it's this false assumption that you see kind of endemic, which is that the left and the right are equivalent and opposite forces. And they're not. And obviously, like, I feel a lot of sympathy for people who are fighting the culture war well. People like Chris Rufo and, a lot of the people in the US pushing against the trans stuff in schools. So that I don't mean to criticize. But there is something where it's like, okay, like if all you do is, watch Fox News, complain about the liberals, and nothing else, it's kind of like, well, yeah, in that case, the culture war is pointless to you. The culture war is just entertainment. It's an entertainment for both sides, unless you're actually willing to like make a real like meat space intervention. So I don't know, maybe that's not particularly organized, but that's what I've been thinking about.
No, I feel the exact same way. I mean, it's a little bit like a dysfunctional marriage where both parties eventually, I mean, they're, wife and husband are constantly arguing, but on some level they kind of enjoy it. You've seen this in many relationships where, once you start enjoying kind of sticking it to or dunking on the other person, nothing's going to come of that. I mean, we talk about hyper reality. I mean, my experience consistently is in reality, this never works. Like nothing has ever been accomplished in my life by dunking, basically. You can accomplish things by making concessions and trying to find out where people are. And sometimes you actually have to do a little bit more for people to get them to agree and go along with what you want and so on. You have to, use the carrot instead of the stick most of the time. And if you're going to use the stick, you're going to have to really, really use the stick. You cannot just sit and come with passive aggressive comments. There's no path from passive aggressive comments to political solution, none whatsoever. So that's kind of how I feel. And I think, the longer people go on like that, the less serious it is. It just becomes so, like they say, it's so tiresome. Like you have the meme with the Chud Jack. I've made a couple of memes on my channel with that, but it's because I've been thinking about it. Like I think the lefties are sort of onto something when they made that character, because he's like billions must die, like the West has fallen, follow me on Twitter. That's kind of the thing. He just keeps he stubs his toe and then the West has fallen or whatever. And as much as I hate it, this is kind of an accurate representation of a lot of people on the right wing, where they just the sort of chorus of like, yeah, society's collapsing, it's just always collapsing, and the solution is to follow me on Twitter and just give me likes and so on. I mean, it's funny, but eventually you have to realize that you're kind of just in a sandbox. You're not even warning about the societal collapse anymore, because how long can the society just keep collapsing while all you're doing is just creating entertainment? There's something just kind of unserious about it.
No, I know what you mean, and it's why if I kind of try to think like, well, what am I doing to fight this? Because there is a certain part where it's like, this is both a specific claim about people on the internet and also something that applies to, people like you and me. And it's like, okay, well, so I'm a guy on the internet who makes essentially entertainment content, right? Like people watch it because they think it's interesting, because they want to spend their time doing it. Well, okay, how do I make that redeemable rather? Okay. More than just like kind of like cheap trash. So one is that I'm trying to like push people to do things in real life, meet people IRL, basket weaving, and kind of adopt pro-social behavior, do things that kind of fight against entropy, in your real life. And then another one is that obviously on kind of if you consider yourself part of the vanguard, like people who are interested in kind of like workshopping ideas, then listening to the conversation, and not just the kind of like, retarded culture war, look at what my SJWs, look at what my chuds did, then like there's actually something to be gained from, engaging with ideas, and it's not for everyone, but I think that it's important to kind of look at the difference between like real like conversations being had and kind of like Jon Stewart style infotainment. When you are essentially paying someone either directly through a subscription service or just like with your time to affirm things you already think. And I guess it's been something I've been kind of thinking about at the end of the year of like, because I've got this like half composed Substack article basically, like, because it's the end of my first calendar year on the internet, so to speak, about like, well, who has influenced me, who do I consider the people who have shaped my thinking the most over this year. And as I was prepping it out, I was like, I don't even know if I like a lot of these people. Like, they kind of drive me crazy. But nonetheless, like if you're actually interested in ideas, refining your own thoughts and looking for real solutions, you're going to have to go places that make you uncomfortable, and you're going to have to index yourself to things that are not just extremely like palatable, if that makes sense.
Yes, from my perspective, I mean, I think self-improvement is very important, and just I mean, this sounds stupid because you're just going back to the Jordan Peterson thing, but self-improvement is evergreen in a sense. We have to actually try to improve ourselves, and then try to improve the communities around us, and actually sit and have some discussions about how that can be done. Because it's one thing that you can always do that you're not really putting that much at risk. You're actually doing something that's benefiting people, and that's something that can be done sort of independently of trying to dunk on the left or whatever the left is doing. Okay, at least I have my own shit in order, quote unquote. As far as like the inspirational stuff, yeah, I mean, I think you're right as well. And trying to do some stuff that's a little bit uncomfortable, and exposing yourself to like a broader spectrum of ideas, so you could approximate some model of the world that is actually a little bit more all-encompassing, instead of like the simple sort of cookie cutter Fox News worldview that you just get, and you just stay in that sandbox all your life.
Right. The version of reality where everything was peaceful until in 1993 the SJWs attacked, or in 2013. This kind of like like a paper cutout version of the world. So anyway, Luddic, we're kind of coming up on time. Is there anything you want to say to kind of wrap things up and bring the discussion to a close?
No, I think we've covered so many things already. Again, just thanks for having me on, and thanks to everybody for listening. And yeah, the people who want to just subscribe to my channel, I assume you're already subbed, but yeah, I mean, I just have the meme channel on my Twitter, so if you want to subscribe.
And you can also find Luddic and Walrus, who was on a few weeks ago on their show, Longhouse, which all of those links will be down in the description. And I will say there are probably two podcasts that I listen to almost all the time. And obviously Geo and Prude, their show, and then your show with Walrus, they're both pretty good. And I will say I'm going to just warn everyone, like, you've been posting these TikTok compilations of essentially like cringe pagans, and I can't stop watching them. They physically hurt me, but nonetheless, I can't stop watching them. So if you're interested in just like pure, unadulterated cringe humor, in addition to also some just like well-produced memes, then Luddic's channel is good for that.
Yes,
anyway,
I mean,
guys,
I need the neuron activation, right? But I mean, we're reaching 2023, and I mean, I've been talking a little bit with the Walrus, and like we're going to change certain things with the format of the Longhouse. We're going to try to make the show a little bit more focused, and with myself as well, I'll probably be trying to create some more quote unquote productive brain stimulating content, and not just the low effort memes in the future. So look out for that.
Well, I'll put it this way: your memes are very funny, and you know what? I think it's important to have a little bit of fun every once in a while. I'm not, you purely just like dour. Everything must be, extremely highbrow. But nonetheless, if that sounds interesting, you guys should check it out. And as far as my stuff goes, obviously my links will be down in the description. You can join, the new public Telegram. We kind of swapped some things around on that. Obviously, you can follow me on Twitter as well. And then this show will be up on YouTube, forever. And then it will also be up as an audio-only file on Apple, Spotify, anywhere you listen to podcasts. And the system I have set up now is that my 10 most recent numbered episodes, those are always free. on Apple and Spotify. But if you want the audio file after it drops out of the top 10, well, then you're going to have to throw some money that way or my way. And you can do that, on any of the normal platforms, and I'll let you into the, to the archive. I realize it's not a huge thing, but it does help cover the cost of the show. And I really do appreciate it. You guys may notice that some art, some assets, the intros may be changing up. And I'll be moving to a new schedule in 2023 because I want to, make this more professional. I want to grow this in a way that, reflects the response I've gotten, because I take this seriously and I want to show you guys, that I take it seriously and I want to put out some good work. So expect some changes, all good changes in the next few weeks. And remember, guys, keep your head up. The lie can't last forever. Good night.